In 1679, a house was built, and it was truly a house of dreams. The question is, what happened to this house and its history, or even its past? Well, come with us now while we show you a deep dive history into Hollywood Lodge. It started out as farmland dating back to the Roman era until 1155, when the grounds were used for hunting by Henry I. The land was part of the Abbey of Chertsey as granted by King Edgar in 967, as mentioned in the Book of Doomsday. Before this house was even built, the area was known as Woodcourt Park, and within this park was a house known as Horton Manor. The estate was granted to John Merston and his wife Rose in 1440. John and Rose got a license to enclose 100 acres of land for the park. After the death of Rose, the manor was passed to William Merston and his wife Anne. He died 1495, leaving his son William the estate. He actually inherited it on his mother's death. After William's death in 1511, he left everything to his wife Beatrice and their daughter Joan. Joan married to the first mine, Nicholas first, followed by William Sander of Ewell. John, the first son of Joan, was given the estate after his mother's death in 1540. It was passed through the generations until reaching the hands of Elizabeth and Anne, daughters of George Mine. Woodcourt was now owned by Elizabeth and Richard Evelyn, who, with the help of John Browning, built the main house Horton Lodge in 1679. Elizabeth then gave the estate to Charles Calvert, 3rd Baron Baltimore. Charles was an English administrator who at first inherited the Maryland through his father. He promoted religious tolerance in the colony and governed Maryland for 40 years. Due to being a Roman Catholic, the rules and legislation caused conflict, leading him to lose control of the lands. One of his earliest decisions was the legal position of African slaves imported into Maryland. There was a rule put into place that any slave who accepted Christian baptism would be freed. And after 200 years of this life, the American Civil War put an end to it all. In 1684, he travelled to England, never to return to the Maryland. After a lot of difficulties with the law, although evading arrest, his fortune improved. He rose to Major General in 1740, and around 1712 his family was given the estate of Woodcourt, including Horton Lodge. In 1715, the 3rd Baron Baltimore died, and Woodcourt was inherited by Benedict Calvert, 4th Baron. However, he died less than 2 months after his father, on the 16th of April, 1715. On Benedict's death, Woodcourt was inherited by 15-year-old Charles Calvert, 5th Baron Baltimore, born 1699. Calvert made many changes to the house. Even his brothers complained that he pulled everything down and finished nothing. On Charles's death in 1751, his son Frederick inherited the estate. Frederick, however, after financial difficulties, sold the estate to a wealthy Soho upholsterer. According to Horace Walpole, Frederick spent large sums of money making the interior of Horton Lodge ridiculous, in what Calvert called French style. Woodcourt was then sold to various owners, Mr. Monk, Mr. Nelson, and Arthur Cathbert, until 1788, when it was sold to London merchant Louis Tessier. The Willis family was the last family to live at the lodge, sometime in the mid-1840s. Henry Willis, who was a banker with his wife Eliza, had 8 children, but only one stayed at the house. Eliza, born 1836, married and moved to Devon. Marie-Anne, born 1837, married an MP for St. Ives. Louisa, 1838, married and lived in Hertfordshire. Matilda, born 1843, married but died at the age of 21. Robert, born 1849, married and started his own business. Charles Edwin, born 1856, never married. William was born 1847, but sadly passed at the age of 2. And lastly, Henry Jr., born 1841. Henry Jr. was the only remaining family member to stay. He married Emmeline and had 7 children. Emmeline Matilda, born 1867, is pictured here with Bertha, born 1877. Nora, 1870, pictured here with Mary, 1875. Nora was one of the first postwomen in the war. Aveleda, born 1871. Elaine Laura, born 1872, and Henry, born 1874. After Emmeline died in 1921, Henry became frail and died 29th of September 1926, and that's the last known record we have of the Willis family. In 1828, the house was described as having a basement cased in stone, a flight of stairs to the hall, columns supporting the structure, 5 en-suites, 2 with drawing rooms, a library, and a chapel to the west. During the war 1914, the estate was used as a military training camp. 2 camps were built, a farm camp and a ridge camp. They built 100 huts to house 5,400 men and 200 officers. Meanwhile, a cluster of 5 hospitals, asylums, were being built around them to house mental health patients, including war heroes. In June 1914, the camp was converted to a hospital made up of 500 beds. The same happened in World War II. The house was an annex to a cluster of hospitals right up until the asylum closed. It changed its name to Hollywood Lodge to stop the confusion with Horton Hospital. Finally, in 1996, the house became a care home to house vulnerable people, until 2003, when it closed its doors for the final time. So after nearly 500 years of history, what has become of this amazing house today? We had the luxury of exploring this house, and we personally couldn't work out very much due to what was being left. It's very little. We found part of what could have been the ice house in the basement. What remains of this house is very little. The building has suffered many fires over the years since closing in 2003 as a care home. On March 28, 2015, the second floor completely collapsed when attacked by arsonists, and the graffiti has built up over the years due to it being abandoned and neglected. the second part of this story leads us to Horton Cemetery. As you can see, this whole area is named around Horton, West Park and Christchurch. Horton Cemetery is very much connected to Horton Lodge, and here's why. Just imagine growing up and living life during the 1900s, where mental health is treated like rats in a cage, having no way out, and cruel treatment just for being different. First, let me take you back to the 1700s, when it was written that each county should erect one general hospital for lunatics, idiots, the blind, crippled, chronically sick. That's correct. Even being deaf or blind was classed as mental health. By 1808, this was recognised in an Act of Parliament, and by 1828, under Justice at Quarter Sessions Act, they were allowed to create county asylums for people who couldn't afford private care. The first to open was Springfield in Wandsworth in 1841, followed by Brookwood, Woking 1867, and third, Cane Hill in 1883. The patients were paupered lunatics cared for by the county and borough. Most were admitted to workhouses first before being moved to asylums. Charitable institutions to cater for mental illness and handicap was brought in by the mid-19th century, including Royal Earlswood for Idiots, 1855, and Royal Holloway, 1885. By 1896, the new London County Council needed to provide a huge number of mental health patients somewhere to go, which led us to the cluster of hospitals. They bought Horton Manor Estate to create 5 large hospitals. Manor Asylum, 1899. Horton Asylum, 1902. Ewell Epileptic Colony, later St. Ebers, 1904, Longgrove, 1907, and West Park, 1924. So where exactly does Horton Cemetery fit in? Well, with the amount of patients within each of these 5 hospitals, where do you put the deceased? Containing 9,000 people buried between 1899 and 1955, this cemetery has its own history. Across 5 acres of land, these are the stories of the 5 asylums and people buried within this cemetery.
hospital opened in 1899 for treatment of people detained under the Lunacy Act. It started out as a series of huts close to Horton Manor. By 1909, 10 brick buildings were added. Between 1916 and 1919, the mansion was used to treat military casualties. After the war, it became a mental hospital for handicapped from 1922. It was for rehab and trainable patients, handicapped, disturbed adolescents, young adults, gaining reputation and behavior therapy. It closed in 1994.
One story that still remains from Manor Asylum is Sarah Adams, born 1850. In 1914, she was admitted to Lambeth Workhouse. After a couple of weeks, she was discharged. 3 days later, she was transferred to Manor Asylum. She was 64 years old, single, a servant, and 4 foot 8 inches, weighed 7 stone. She may have had signs of rickets and a lower plate of false teeth. She was admitted for prolonged mental stress, simple-minded, confusion, and forgetfulness. She was also restless, trying to get through the doors, no idea of her surroundings. She passed away in 1915 at the age of 65, buried in plot 1588B. So what exactly does plot 1588B mean? Well, out of 9,000 people, only around 8 received headstones. The rest were buried in plots of land with no headstones or caskets, mainly because there was no family to care for them, and also to keep the costs of funerals down. This has caused many issues because of the lack of decency and respect. Also means that future generations can't visit their loved ones.
The area is now a housing estate made up of houses and apartments. The actual hospital itself is now apartments, but here's to the memory of the patients and history. So next up, which I'm hoping is in front of me, is Horton Hospital, opened in 1902 with 2,000 beds to treat female patients. Again, in 1915, it was used to treat military, but by 1927, it had 1,605 patients. Only 187 of them were men. In 1925, the malaria therapy unit opened with 14 beds and isolation blocks. 1939, just before the war, its psych patients were being transferred again, so the hospital could be used for military. After it joined the NHS service, it only had 527 beds. 93 of those were male, and they were put in 3 wards. 255 were female in 6 wards. By 1949, it managed to get 11 female and 8 patient wards. Eventually it closed in 1997, but a small unit with 67 beds, Horton Haven, remains on the site. Let's go find it.
Edith Webster Steer, born 1861, was admitted to Chamberwell Workhouse in 1907. She was alleged insane and transferred to Horton Asylum after 15 days. We have no records of medical, but 3 years later, in 1909, she died at the age of 47 of untreated syphilis. Laid to rest in grave number 655A. We are also aware that 3 to 4 bodies were commonly put into one grave plot to save space.
Horton Asylum is now a new building for housing from 2008. Livingstone Park is the main area of housing estate. While I walk down to the next one, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about it. Ewell Epileptic Colony was opened in 1903. It consisted of 9 villas accommodating 326 patients. In 1909, 2 more villas were built, and the number increased to 429. During the war, again, it was used as a military hospital, returning to mental health in 1927, adding 2 extra villages. It changed its name to St. Ebba's in 1948 for mentally subnormal patients, and it closed in 1962.
Agnes Sullivan, born 1877, was admitted to Chamberwell Workhouse in 1906. Observations said she was having delusions, so she was sent to Ewell, where she was diagnosed with epileptic insanity. She had epilepsy since the age of 12, described as dull, depressed, and a strange appearance and behaviour. Also childish, weak-minded, and slow. She hears voices that tease her, telling her that her father is doing wrong. She stays until her death in 1927 at the age of 50, and buried in grave 1070A. In 2004 and 2012, human remains were discovered on the footpath by a dog walker. The police suspected that these came from Horton Cemetery.
In 2004, work began to convert and upgrade some of the old buildings for 55 long-staying lunatic patients. In 2008, a therapy suite with a new hydro pool was opened. As of 2011, most of the buildings were redeveloped with a small amount of patients. Longgrove opened in 1907, accommodating 2,149 patients. It was used during the war again. It received a large number of Polish patients. It closed in 1992 and was replaced with Kingston Hospital.
William Oldfield, born 1858, enters Longgrove in 1901. He was discharged into the hands of Bow Road Workhouse, moved to Christchurch Workhouse in 1903 until October. He then enters Mint Street Workhouse in 1904 but leaves to go to Newington Workhouse later that year. He was described as temporarily disabled. The letters AL was shown above his name, meaning a lunatic. He discharges himself May 1904, only to enter again in June. On April 1907, he leaves again and enters Christchurch in June 1907. At the door of Mint again in April 1909, and on May 6, 1909, he moves to Longgrove. William dies February 1910 and is laid to rest in plot 869A. Soldiers from the wars, children born in asylums, and well-known people are also buried here. One happened to have survived the Titanic, George Pelham. Other notable members include Tutti Fay and Brian Pedley. A famous escapee as told by an eyewitness. I was at Longgrove when Ronnie Cray escaped. He changed his clothes with his brother, Reggie, who was visiting him. Ronnie asked the nurse if he could get his brother a cup of tea. The nurse, thinking that it was Reggie, agreed. Ronnie then went out the building, climbed over the fence near the church, where there was a large American car waiting in Horton Lane to whisk him away. When the nurse found out what had happened, he promptly put Reggie in a padded cell, although he had been released upon instructions of Horton office. West Park Hospital opened in 1924 and closed in 2009. Nothing really remains of the hospital today, as you can see. Kate Bailey, born 1882. At just 17 years old, she enters Berkshire Asylum in 1899 for unknown reasons. Most patients there were diagnosed with mania or dementia and were subjected to what was known as the moral regime. Basically just fresh air, bland food, and keeping busy. She was discharged in 1900s. She was back in the cluster sometime in 1913 and died in 1914. She is buried in plot 1043B. Treatment amongst these asylums include a mix of cholesterol care and developing therapies. Could be as harsh as restraints and baths, very hot or very cold. However, the cluster offered more modern approaches like industrial and behavioural therapies. This here is a picture of the electrode treatment that some of the patients received, and I have managed to find a diary form intel of what this included.
Sheila was a patient at Horton in the 1960s, and remarkably, despite being very unwell, she kept a detailed diary of her experiences. Here she recalls her experience of ECT.
There was a sort of dormitory place where they took me to have this ECT. But that was where we slept at night.
So to have your ECT treatment, you went into the dormitory?
Yes, but the other patients would be in the living areas. The other patients wouldn't have witnessed this, I don't think. I mean, I think there were maybe 2 or 3 of us at a time having this ECT.
In the same room at the same time?
In the same room, in this sort of dormitory. You know, beds close to each other.
And could you just describe the dormitory for me? Were the beds very close together?
Well, they were fairly close together, but because I'd been at boarding school, it was just like a boarding school dormitory. They were quite close together, yes.
just talking about the ECT treatment. Did anyone discuss that with you before you had your first experience of ECT? Did anyone explain what it was or what was going to happen?
No.
So, do you remember just being taken off for this treatment? How did it happen?
Well, they just took me along and put me down in a bed, and I suppose they gave me some sort of anaesthetic. And then when I came to, I got some short-term memory loss. And I didn't like this. I think it happened 2 or 3 times, but I used to try and avoid it by drinking water so that they couldn't give it to me.
And did that work?
I think it did. I think they couldn't give it to me.
Colostoral care and harsh treatment like physical restraints where patients can be restrained even when not violent. Baths were calming but included immersion in very hot or very cold for hours or even days, sometimes submerged. Others included electroshock, laboratory and meds. Thomas William Coley. He was admitted to epileptic colony on 16th of February 1906, just before his 16th birthday. He was said to be violent and tired of life. His diagnosis of insanity and instability with loss of self-control. He was in good health, but he has an impaired heart. Mentally, he seems to have no difficulty with current events but can't say why he is there. In November, his fits increased and it was unbearable. The new year of 1907 brought a deterioration in his personality and became irritable. He became detained under care and treatment. Through 1908, he was sly and untruthful. By May 1909, he was on medication. 1910, extreme confusion and remained helpless and bedridden. On October 31st, he suffered 5 fits and he was transferred to the padded room. In 1912, more ups and downs, falls and fits. In August, he was transferred to hospital to receive soap and water and remained a regular treatment. The pattern was throughout 1913, and the next 2 years it continued this way. He was lost and confused. January 26, 1916, he was in bed for 6 or 7 weeks. He lost 2 stone in weight and stood at 6 stone 3 pounds. 6th of February 1916, he died from his epilepsy and buried 6th of February 1916 in grave 2008A. Sarah Lloyd Hamilton suffered from postnatal depression a condition not recognised as a illness in those days. Entered care 27th of January 1994, where she remained for the rest of her life. Bethnal for 5 years, 3 months, July 1894. Beaksley 4 years, 5 months, October 1899. Hellingly 2 years, 4 months, March 1904. Bucks 1 year, 9 months, July 1906. Manor 13 years, 7 months, April 1908, and Horton, December 1921. She was 62 when she came to the manor because of insanity. She suffered delusions such as her son was a Prince of Wales, snake in her spine, eating her brain, son Duke of York, she is Catherine Parr, and lots more. She passed away 1930 and is buried in grave plot 916A. Brian Pedley, Victorian star of the stage, born 1844, admitted to Longgrove to confusion, insanity and delirium, spent time ill with heart disease. June 1910, he died on the 4th of July 1910. No, that didn't make sense. What the fuck? He died on the 4th of July 1910 and is buried in grave 889A. This plaque is the only thing to remember all these people buried here today. As for what else remains, well, look at this. This so-called cemetery sits here, and as you can see, it has become wasteland. Brambles, forest of trees cover what should be a place of rest for 9,000 people. Gertrude Anderson, birth unknown. She was acknowledged with family until her admission to epileptic colony, where her uncle gave records of no relations. Annie James was one of the first to be buried at Horton Cemetery. She was admitted to Manor on June 24th, 1899, at the age of 47. Grief, emotional disturbance, poor health, motor impairment, tremors and coordination, described as demented. One time she was confined to bed due to being feeble and falls. She died from pneumonia July 26th and is buried in grave 1.